Hi there, I'm Dr. Sean Orr, and this is Dr. Drew Edwards, and we're the Neurogenesis Project. Today we're bringing you 5 things that you need to know about Hunter Biden and addiction.
And this really isn't about Hunter Biden, but since he's in the news and aspects of his addiction, well-publicized addiction, because he wrote a really good book about his addiction, have come up in the trial, and I think the definitions of addiction and recovery have been mangled. And I think that's a detriment to those currently in recovery and to those seeking recovery. So we want to explain from a medical scientific perspective and I guess a spiritual perspective as well, what addiction is and what it is not.
That's right, yeah. Many of the patients that we take care of are struggling with different forms of brain disease, and addiction is one of them. And so Dr. Edwards is a leading expert in addiction medicine, and so we wanted to bring some concepts to you today and try to just guide our audience a little bit better so that we can have some clarity about addiction and the implications for our society. So topic number 1, we're going to talk about how addiction is a chronic degenerative brain disease. Would you like to elaborate, Drew?
Yeah, it's also primary, and I mentioned primary because for a long time and still today I hear people think, well, the reason they're using drugs is because some emotional wound that they have. That may be a part of the reason someone started drinking and using drugs. By the way, sidebar, alcohol is a sedative hypnotic drug. So when we say alcohol or drugs, we're including alcohol in there unless otherwise noted. So primary, once you have a primary addiction, all the other problems you have cannot be fixed or helped until you stop using the drug, because it mimics many mental illnesses, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and it's very difficult to diagnose someone who's actively using in a mental health, and I suppose a neurological standpoint too.
Sure. So one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is a term that we use called brain failure. This may sound a little odd to our audience. Most people are familiar with the idea of heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure, but you just don't hear the term brain failure out there. So we're trying to popularize this concept. Everybody's probably suffered from some form of brain failure at some time. If you have fogginess in your thinking, excessive fatigue, hungover, sure. There are many routes to get to brain failure, but unfortunately alcohol, being a volatile hydrocarbon, has a solvent effect on the brain, so it's a lot like paint thinner from that perspective. And this can lead to brain failure acutely and then also chronically.
And that's the other part of our first point, is it's a degenerative brain disease. The more you put a solvent into your body, the more damage it's going to do. But that's true with things like marijuana as well. Marijuana is very harmful to brain function. And because it's a lipid, it stays in there a long time and just clogs up the works, really. But we're not going to focus on marijuana. That's another topic.
Sure, it's a very unpopular point of view these days, but it is a very salient one in the sense that any kind of addictive substance is going to have a negative effect on brain function in the long run.
So primary, chronic, degenerative, progressive brain disease. And there is no cure. Once you reach the point of being addicted to something, a substance, there is no not being addicted. You're either addicted using chemicals or you're addicted in recovery. That's point number 1. So point number 2 would be recovery is a intentional commitment to abstinence. And people may not understand that when someone's in denial, it's different than lying, because the intensity and the veracity of wanting the drug is something most of us cannot understand. The best thing I can help you with, if you've ever not eaten for 2 days, all the things you worried about before that become way less important, and your mind goes, I need food. And that's what craving is, and that's what addicts feel, particularly cocaine and crack addicts. They have an intense veracity to get the drug, as if a starving man was looking for food. And biologically, we can show that now.
Right, yes, yeah. With brain imaging, we can actually demonstrate the impact of drugs, alcohol being one of those, on brain function. And we actually have been able to map out what we call neural networks that build up the craving system that drives behavior. Think about the craving that you would feel if you were holding your breath underwater for 3 or 4 minutes. The one thing you would be focused on is getting out of that water so you could breathe again. And in a sense, people who are dealing with addiction and acute withdrawal have that same kind of intensity. So when you're talking about recovery being an active, intentional commitment, tell us a little bit what you mean about surrender and the powerlessness.
The spiritual part where, and just using Hunter Biden as an example, and if you haven't read his book, it's a good read. He does explain it very well of how out of control his life was. He wasn't raised in a horrible environment. He wasn't beaten. He wasn't abused. But he's had a lot of trauma in his life. The Biden family has suffered many untimely deaths, and losing a son is probably the worst thing any parent could imagine happening. And so they've had a lot of pain in their life. But again, that is not a cause of addiction. It's a contributing factor to why you may begin. But other people, some people don't do that because they have a church or a fellowship, a community of friends who support them. So we don't worry about how you got there. We worry about you're there now, and you're hurting your life, and you're hurting people who love you. And that brings me into the other part of this disease. It's a family disease.
So that's point number 3. Addiction
Yes.
is a family disorder. It's not just the individual. It's the family. You tell me often that the family orients around the most injured family member.
Sure. If you had a member of your family, a child, and they got pneumonia and they were really sick, and you would bring them food, wouldn't expect them to drive, you wouldn't expect them to pay for things, the family would accommodate that illness for a while and help the person get back on their feet. That same thinking when it comes to addiction is absolutely crippling to the addict and to the family, because that helping never ends. Because the addict can manipulate the family and saying, I need help, or I need this, can I just, how many times I've heard families saying, he just needed $20 to get gas, and that's now up to about $3,020 worth. So by doing for the addict what they're capable of doing for themselves is what we call enabling. I call it crippling them. Hard work and earning something through hard work is the best way to have a self-esteem and the best way to feel important. One of the things that I heard, and I hear this all the time with families, and the Biden family is no exception, they said, we're so proud of Hunter. He had gone to a treatment center, and they said that he has overcome this addiction and he has beat it. And I understand the hyperbole in that, it's a strong statement, but it's not a factual statement. Addicts remain sober by saying this: I am powerless over this drug. It's ruining my life. I cannot use it again. And so I will just commit I won't use today. And that's where we get the famous one day at a time thing. So it's not something you can turn on and off. And so to say something like, when I signed this form, I wasn't using, therefore I wasn't an addict. The question was, do you use drugs? Well, I'm not using them at the moment. He knew, and we know from his book, that he was a sick addict, and with a severe brain disease that impaired his judgment and thinking. He's a lawyer, and he knew this was not right. But I say this with no judgment. I say this because he was so much craving cocaine, he needed a gun, because in other things we've read and learned, he needed to go buy crack in a really bad part of town from some really shady people, and he was afraid. But getting a gun was the most expedient way to get to crack cocaine for him. And he tells his, I think, girlfriend at the time, that he's got the gun, he's going to meet his drug dealer. And he had some trepidation about that because he was scared. But people are willing to put their life on the line to get a drug. That's the thing you need to know about addiction. So it's a family illness, and the family then becomes this, they can become as obsessed and preoccupied with their family member who's suffering from addiction in the same way the addict is preoccupied with attaining their drug of choice. And in treatment must involve the family, and we need to help them stop doing that. You can love them, but holding them accountable for their own choices is what we encourage people to do.
Great. So point 4, recovery involves family, whether they like it or not, are either dragged into this or they're part of the problem. And then I guess that brings us to point number 4, recovery has a spiritual component. Like to talk about that?
I forget.
Anyway,
it's a spiritual component, and just a little history on this. Alcoholics Anonymous, which has probably saved more addicted people than all the treatment centers and counselors, psychiatrists combined times 10. In 1935, it began officially. They had tried something before called the Oxford Movement. It was a Christian movement from England. But the New York Jews would not attend it. It was something they couldn't do because of their religious beliefs. The wisdom of a guy named Bill W. and Dr. Bob, who founded it, said, let's just say God as you understand him. They didn't worry about gender politics then. They just said God as you understand him. And then it was open to everybody. So recovery is not a religious thing. It's simply saying if I'm powerless, I got to find power somewhere. I need someone to help me, and they turn to God as they understand them, and their family who has learned what is helpful versus what is not helpful. And that's an essential part of treatment. Because if they go home and they can get away with getting their family to enable them, they relapse.
So I think what I hear you saying is that as somebody is coming to terms with their addiction, they're recognizing that they are not able to overpower the addiction. They don't have the tools needed. They have to surrender to that fact and admit it and be vulnerable in order to start to put processes into place that will help them to stay sober.
Exactly.
Is that a fair statement? Okay, great.
There's an old song you might remember, James Taylor, Fire and Rain, and one of the verses is, look down upon me, Jesus, you got to help me. I won't make it through another day. Mm-hmm. The idea of one day at a time. And for him, Christianity was his higher power. My body's aching, and my time is at hand. Mm. And you listen to James Taylor. He does describe why he wrote that, because he was a heroin addict at the time. Mm. His body was aching, and he learned, I got to get through today. Yeah. And that's really good for us to know. So the spiritual idea is, I can't do this. And if you're a faith-filled person, and we could replace the word drugs with sin, you would never say, I beat sin. I've overcome sin. I'm never going to sin again. People would laugh at you.
Good luck with that.
So what we accept is, I'm a broken, sinful man. I do things that I shouldn't do because of my nature. And so the same with addiction. They do things they wish they hadn't done, and they feel incredible shame and remorse. And so they give it to their higher power. The Fellowship of Recovering People, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous or some other group, is there to say, yeah, we don't judge you. We just love you the way you are today, and let's just get through today. And 10 years later, you got a lot of one day at a times that have added up. And that has been kind of tortured in this description during the legal process with Hunter Biden. Now, I understand, and we understand, that the lawyer's job is to win. To win.
Sure.
Not to always paint things exactly as they are. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm saying if you ask people what addiction is, you ask 100 people, you're going to get 90 different answers. Because we don't know.
So maybe this is point number 5, which we're hearing feedback from our patients and the community, which is that the rigorous honesty that's necessary to sustain sobriety seems to be pulled apart in this trial. Tell us more about your thoughts on honesty and politics.
So for our patients in my history, I've been working with addicts for 2 or 3 decades now. I started with teenagers, but relapse isn't designated by the first time you use a drug or drink again. It's the first time you lie to yourself. I can go out and just have a Diet Coke while my friends are drinking. That's relapse. That's the thinking that's starting this rock rolling down the hill, or the snowball, if you will. And when they start thinking like that, relapse is going to happen. Because you can't say, I can put myself in this environment where I've never succeeded before, and this time it'll be different. And that's sort of the mantra of addicted people. This time will be different. I'll do it better next time. And they just progressively get worse.
So that it's a self-delusion, it's maybe not being rigorously honest with yourself about your vulnerabilities, about your risks, about your...
It's the veracity of the addiction, too, that most of us don't understand. I do forensic work for the state, and I'm often asked to testify in murder cases where there's addiction involved, and I've men and women who have committed murder in the process of trying to get money or things to sell so they could get crack immediately. And in the process, they ended up killing the person. And that wasn't their intent to do that. But if you kill somebody in the commission of a felony, like breaking into someone's house, you are guilty of first-degree murder. At least, and that's the way I understand it. Which brings us to, are you accountable for your actions if you're an addict? So addiction is a degenerative brain disease. And one of the things that's come up on the trial is, well, when I signed this document that I don't use drugs, I wasn't using that day. And the total opposite of that was, I'm an addict, I have a brain disease, I cannot be held accountable for my decision and my choice to do that. Well, that's not how the legal system works. An example would be, if you haven't eaten for a couple of days and you steal food, you're guilty of stealing, and you can be prosecuted as such. The mitigating factor that you're starving would come up in the penalty phase. So what's the sentence for this starving person who stole food? We would hope leniency would be the outcome of that. And I'm asked the question often with these cases I do, Dr. Edwards, if this person wasn't using these drugs and wasn't addicted, would this crime have happened? And my answer 90% of the time is no. It wouldn't have happened, because they wouldn't have had that horrible obsession and craving. Remember, their body is aching. Time is at hand. They are just trying to get through the day. And so crack is like a big hot bowl of something you love for someone who hasn't had it in 3 days, and he's smelling it, and he wants it, and he's going for it. That's what addiction is. And a lot of the crimes. Remember in the late 80s, early 90s, how crack just decimated our cities?
Yeah.
The crime and the murder, it was horrible, because you got thousands of people in that condition. Last thing about that, particularly with crack, you're not dangerous when you're high. You're happy. You're the happiest you'll ever be when you smoke crack. It doesn't last very long. You're dangerous when you don't have crack and your body's craving it. That's when you commit crimes. That's when you lie. That's when you do anything you got to do to get a hold of that drug. And I would just, my opinion, not political, my opinion is he was in such a state that getting a gun to go to a bad part of town to buy drugs from a real shady character looked like the best option to him. Now, in his right mind, he would never have made that choice. Never. He would have found another way to deal with things. But addiction is absolutely devastating to people, and they don't want their lives to be like that. I don't believe Hunter Biden wanted his life to be like this. But in his trial, a lot of these defense arguments have come up, and I wanted us to have an opportunity to explain to people what addiction is and what it is not. Dr. Orr, let's talk about the neurodegeneration, the neurodegenerative part of addiction.
From the point of view of brain health, addiction to a toxic substance is a problem because it's continuing to introduce a solvent into a fatty substance the brain is. And so alcohol being a solvent tends to dissolve that. And so somebody who's exposed for a period of time to chronic alcohol use is going to essentially be dissolving their brain. And so I believe why we refer to addiction, especially to alcohol, but other toxic substances also, as a degenerative brain disease, is that neurons, brain cells, essentially die prematurely because of the chronic exposure to the toxin. So very often our patients who we take care of in this setting, we're trying to encourage them not only to cease the damage, right? So sobriety is extremely important just to stop the brain injury. It would be just as important for a concussion patient not to go back out onto the field and continue to play football, right? I've taken care of many professional athletes who have been concussed. So you want to stop the damage and then allow the healing process to take place. And we have numerous strategies that we can use to speed up the healing in somebody who's had chronic brain injury, including somebody who's been addicted to a toxic substance.
That reminds me of the function. So why do people do these things? Why do people who are drunk do either stupid or violent things that they wouldn't normally do? So part of the definition is repeated harmful consequences.
The definition of alcoholism or definition of addiction?
Addiction.
Okay. All right.
So addiction is really you're addicted to the thing that elevates your mood.
Mm-hmm.
If I was really specific, elevate your dopamine and other reward chemistry. That's what you're addicted to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine, this is a baseline, my mood, and when I get 2 beers would be like this, and I probably wouldn't lose control, do anything bad. But if I went to happy hour and had 2 for $1, I'd end up with 10 drinks in 3 hours. I've just boosted my dopamine 4 or 5 times beyond normal. But when I come down, I do not stop at normal. I'm into the reserves now. So I wake up the next morning and I feel worse than I did that night before. And this is oversimplifying this. And so what does that mean? That means that things that were previously rewarding and enjoyable and fun to the addicted person are no longer rewarding, enjoyable, or fun. And someone is addicted to crack cocaine, and I'm being serious here, it would be like life without crack would be like going from a 75-inch high definition television to watching a 12-inch black and white TV. That's how life looks to them without the drug. Now, they used to feel happy and do fun things, but the addiction has depleted their happy chemistry down to the point where without the drug, life's a 12-inch black and white television to them. Boring, depressing, and when they use the drug, and this is the funny thing, using the drug will work every time. It will boost your dopamine and other chemistry up. Now, very few things work every time. Even the people who love you won't make you feel good all the time. So in a sick way, drugs are very dependable in what they do to you. I mean, they're killing you in the process, but what they do to you is there's this little voice that whispers in your ear, oh, you can just go have one. What's the big deal? And that is not God or the higher power saying that. That is the addiction speaking to you, saying it's not you, it's other people. And that's hallmark, is deflecting responsibility, because if I take ownership that these drugs are harmful, then I got to quit using them, and I don't know what else I can do to feel good. That's the paradox that they're in.
Okay, well, this is very, very good. So to recap, point number 1, addiction is a chronic degenerative brain disease. Number 2, recovery is an active, intentional commitment to abstinence. Number 3, recovery involves family. Number 4, recovery has a spiritual component. And number 5, recovery involves honesty, and politics seem to be maybe getting in the way of that to some degree. So from that perspective, bringing this to a close then, what do you think are the implications, the larger implications for society in terms of our brain health as a country, as a nation? Talk to me about that a little.
I was talking to a good friend, Beth, the other day, and who's in recovery, and we were talking about the program of recovery, which I know and I'm not in recovery, but I like going to meetings because I hear rigorous honesty there that I don't hear all the time. And we said, wouldn't it be nice if everyone kind of had this program of a commitment to being the best I can be today and just be intentional about living life to its fullest capacity today and accept whatever happens. I accept the good and the bad and the ugly. You know, that's how people in recovery live. That's how most of us used to live.
Mm-hmm.
Now we live by how can I get to my cell phone quickly?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're so bored and we grab our cell phone for no apparent reason. Or it used to be, I turn on the TV. What are you going to watch? I don't know. I'm just going to turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
So if our country, how angry people seem to be, if we could just drop our rocks, meaning we're not going to stone each other to death anymore because we disagree with them politically. What if we all just dropped our rocks for a while and worked on our self? How can I be a better version of me? And how can I help you be a better version of you without judgment? Let's just stop judging each other for differences that people have. You know, there's a border between France and Germany for a reason. Did you know that? Because for a lot of history, they didn't like each other. They didn't believe the same thing, so they put a wall up. In our country, we're supposed to, the idea of America, we can come together and be Americans, and we can be free. But freedom depends on our ability to judge virtue, to be virtuous people. If we're all virtuous, we don't need police or jails if we're virtuous, right? But if we're politically as upset as we are now, we're just angry. And recovery is about peace, inner peace, and understanding God as you understand Him is in charge. Not me, not you. Let's just relax and, you know, let live.
Well, that's a great message and a great way to wrap this up. So thank you, everybody. If you got value from this video, please like. We'd really appreciate if you subscribe to our channel as well. Since we're new, we're just getting started. We're grateful for your the audience, and any support that you can give us there would be appreciated. Also, please comment below if you've had struggles with addiction, with substance use disorder, or a family member has. It's so common. We get these feedback all the time from our patients and their family, but we would definitely like to hear what you have to say. Do you have an opinion about what's going on in the political sphere? Please, let's try to keep the comments civil. We don't want to open up a nasty channel here for people to be hurting each other, yes. But we would like civil comments and your feedback about whether you think addiction is playing a role in our politics, how it is supposed to be represented. So please feel free to comment below.
The only enemy here is the addiction.
Yes.
But what addiction does, it turns people against people, and the addict goes right through the middle and does what he or she wants to do. Mm-hmm. If we could focus on how do we better help people who are addicted, and that number is going up all the time. The average onset of your first use is 12 in our country, and that's unsustainable. This is in no way an exhaustive explanation of addiction. This was the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. And we are going to talk more about addiction and get into some of the details, but we wanted to get this out there to help you understand what's going on in that situation and extend it to people in your life that you're aware of.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Edwards, and thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next video.